Beverly Anderson stood by the kitchen sink, staring out the small window that overlooked her modest backyard. The sun was just beginning to set over her little corner of Chicago, casting an orange glow on the trees and fences that boxed in her world. The rhythmic clinking of her fingers against the ceramic mug in her hand was a small comfort, but today, like most days, she felt the weight of the world pressing against her chest. It had been 5 years since the divorce, 5 years since her ex-husband, David, left. He didn't leave violently or in a fit of anger. He just walked out. One quiet Sunday afternoon, after their daughter Lila had fallen asleep for her nap, David turned to Beverly with tired eyes and said, "I can't do this anymore." And just like that, the man she had shared a life with for over a decade disappeared. He didn't completely disappear, of course. He sent the child support checks, sometimes on time, sometimes not. He picked up Lila for their scheduled weekends and then dropped her back off, always at the same time on Sunday nights, like clockwork. But his emotional presence had long since vanished from Beverly's life, and she was left to fill the void of 2 parents. Beverly worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. By day, she was a secretary at a local law firm, handling appointments and fielding calls from clients who barely acknowledged her existence. At night, after putting Lila to bed, she worked from home, doing data entry for a small company she had found online. It was grueling, but it paid the bills. Barely. Her daily routine was relentless. Wake up before dawn, get Lila ready for school, fight through the morning traffic, work 8 hours, pick Lila up from the after-school program, cook dinner, help with homework, and put her to bed. Then it was back to work, clicking away on her laptop until her eyes burned, long after most people had gone to sleep. Lila, now 8, was her heart. Smart, curious, and full of life, she was the light that kept Beverly going. But raising a child on her own came with its own set of challenges. There were the little things that piled up, like being the only one to help with school projects or attend parent-teacher conferences. And then there were the bigger things, like the day Lila came home asking why Daddy wasn't around all the time, or why the other kids at school had 2 parents picking them up. Beverly didn't have answers to these questions, but she always tried to smile to be strong. "Daddy loves you, sweetheart," she would say, her heart aching. "He just doesn't live here anymore." But no one saw the late nights when Beverly would sit alone on her couch, staring blankly at the television, too exhausted to even think, let alone feel. No one knew how many times she had to cancel plans with friends because she couldn't find a babysitter, or how she'd pretended not to hear the whispering parents at Lila's school when they saw her always alone. Being a single mom was lonely. And hard. So hard. Adding to the complexity of Beverly's life were the constant financial woes. David's child support checks were unreliable, arriving sporadically and often short of what she needed. Every month, Beverly wrestled with the same math. What bills could she pay? What bills would have to wait? There was the electric bill, always looming. The landlord's reminders about rent were a constant source of anxiety. She often had to choose between buying new shoes for Lila and paying for a repair on the old beat-up car that threatened to break down any day. The car, an aging Ford with more miles than she could count, was essential for her daily routine. Without it, she couldn't get to work or drop Lila off at school. Every time it made a strange noise, Beverly held her breath, dreading the possibility of another costly repair she couldn't afford. Her dream had always been to return to school and finish her degree, but that felt so far out of reach now. Without a degree, her job opportunities were limited, trapping her in low-paying, thankless roles that barely provided for her and her daughter. She fantasized sometimes about what her life might have been like had she finished college before having Lila, about the career she could have built for herself. But there was no time to dwell on that. Her reality now was survival. The financial pressure weighed heavily on Beverly, but she refused to let Lila feel the full burden. She made sure her daughter always had clean clothes for school and something to bring for lunch, even if it meant eating cereal for dinner herself. Lila didn't need to know that they were close to eviction more than once. She didn't need to know about the nights Beverly lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how they would make it through the next month. Dating was a nightmare. Beverly had tried, more than once, to put herself back out there. Her friends, those who were still in her life, told her it was time, that she deserved to be happy. So, she downloaded the dating apps, swiping through profiles in her rare moments of free time. Every once in a while, she'd match with someone. Her first date in years was with a man named Mark. He was kind, soft-spoken, and seemed to understand Beverly's world. But after a few dates, the cracks in her facade began to show. One evening, while they were at a small cafe, her phone rang. It was Lila. Beverly excused herself, stepping outside to calm her daughter, who was anxious because she couldn't find her favorite stuffed animal. When she returned, Mark's expression had changed. "I get it," he said, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for all that responsibility." And just like that, he was gone. The same thing happened again and again. Some men didn't even wait for the third or fourth date. One even told her flat out that he wasn't interested in playing dad before she had even brought Lila up. The truth was, Beverly's life didn't leave much room for romance. Between the demands of motherhood and her jobs, there was no space left for dating. And even when she tried, the guilt gnawed at her. How could she focus on herself when her daughter needed her? How could she justify spending money on a new dress for a date when the electric bill was past due? Beverly's loneliness became a constant companion, more familiar than any friend or lover she could imagine. Her heart ached for intimacy, for someone to see her, not just as a mother or a woman scraping by, but as a person who was worthy of love and affection. Yet, every time she tried to let someone in, life got in the way. The emotional labor of being a single mother was one of the most draining aspects of Beverly's life. Every time Lila came home upset about something at school, whether it was a friend who had ignored her or a teacher who had been too harsh, Beverly had to be the rock. She had to be the comforting shoulder, the steady presence, and the problem solver. But who did Beverly go to when she needed comfort? The truth was, she didn't have anyone. Her parents lived a few states away, and while they loved her, they didn't fully understand the depth of her struggles. Her friends, those who hadn't drifted away, had their own lives, marriages, and children. The isolation became unbearable at times, but Beverly swallowed it, as she always did. No one saw the hours she spent late at night, worrying about Lila's future, wondering if she was doing enough as a parent. No one saw her desperately trying to stay awake during work, too exhausted to focus, knowing that one mistake could cost her the job that kept a roof over their heads. No one saw her walking into parent-teacher conferences alone, facing the silent judgment of teachers who assumed her single motherhood must somehow be affecting Lila's behavior or academic performance. Then, one cold winter day, Beverly's life took an unexpected turn. She had been feeling run down for weeks, more tired than usual, her body aching in ways she couldn't quite explain. At first, she chalked it up to stress, to the endless grind of work and parenting, but when she fainted at work one afternoon, her boss insisted she go to the doctor. The news wasn't good. Beverly had developed a thyroid condition that would require medication and constant monitoring. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was yet another burden to carry. The medication wasn't cheap, and the time off work for doctor's appointments meant losing income. More than that, the diagnosis shook her. It was a reminder of how fragile her health was, how much everything depended on her being strong and capable. What would happen if she got too sick to take care of Lila? Who would step in? David certainly couldn't be relied on. The weight of that responsibility was terrifying. Beverly didn't tell anyone about the diagnosis, not even her mother. She didn't want to worry them. She didn't want to admit, even to herself, that her body was wearing down under the constant pressure. So she pushed through, as always, swallowing the pain, both physical and emotional, and continuing to carry the weight of her world on her shoulders. One cold February evening, Beverly sat in her car, parked outside the small grocery store. Lila was inside with her grandmother, who had come down for a rare visit, giving Beverly a moment of solitude. She watched as families walked in and out, some hand in hand, others pushing shopping carts together, laughing and chatting. A lump formed in her throat. She hadn't cried in months, but now the tears came fast. She cried for all the things she had lost, the dreams she had for her marriage, for her family. She cried for the nights spent alone, for the dates that never went past the second dinner, for the exhaustion that never seemed to go away. And she cried for Lila, who, despite her best efforts, was growing up without the constant presence of a father. But as she sat there, wiping away the tears with the sleeve of her worn-out sweater, Beverly thought about everything she had gained too. Lila was thriving. She was happy, healthy, and loved. Beverly had created a home for her, however imperfect it might be, and that mattered more than anything. The sacrifices she made, the sleepless nights, the missed opportunities, the loneliness, were worth it, if it meant Lila would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally. Beverly took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, walking into the grocery store to find her daughter. Lila ran up to her, her small arms wrapping tightly around Beverly's waist. "Mommy, look! Grandma let me get cookies." For a moment, the exhaustion faded, replaced by a warmth Beverly couldn't quite explain. She bent down and kissed the top of Lila's head. "You deserve those cookies, sweetheart." The truth was, Beverly didn't have all the answers. She still had nights when she cried herself to sleep, still had moments when the loneliness was overwhelming. But she had learned that being a single mom wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about doing the best you could, even when it felt like the world was stacked against you. It was about the small victories, like getting through another week or seeing your child smile after a long day. And though no one saw the sacrifices she made, Beverly knew that they mattered. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about her. It was about Lila. And for her, Beverly would sacrifice everything all over again. As she walked out of the store hand in hand with her daughter, Beverly felt a quiet strength rising in her chest. Life was hard, yes, but she was stronger. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough.